So as you already know, or if you don't, here's a little cue in. I released a podcast called Grit a couple weeks ago, and the launch went amazingly well. All thanks to you, by the way. So thank you guys so much. But it went really, really, really well. And one of the goals that I wanted to hit during this launch was to get the podcast on New and Noteworthy. That is iTunes category for about 10 to 15 podcasts in each category of podcasts that it thinks are great and are brand new, and you can only get there in the first 6 weeks of your launch on iTunes. And when I first launched my first podcast over 3 years ago now, All Up in Your Lady Business, with my co-host Jacqueline, we got in New and Noteworthy on the very tail end of our 6-week time frame. Well, this time I got in the first week, and I'm so freaking pumped, but I also know that it's like a code that people can't crack. So I wanted to pop on today and film you guys a video for how I actually hit New and Noteworthy in that first week and how you can do it too. Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you are new around these parts, my name is Jessica Stansberry, and I am here to help you up-level your success in whatever that looks like for you, and to stop getting in your own way so that you can live a better life, be a better person, and just overall love your life more than you do now. So if that's your jam, go ahead and hit subscribe because I am here for it. Also, if you have not checked out my new podcast called Grit, make sure you go to gritpodcast.co/subscribe, and you'll find the links to subscribe on whatever podcast player that you want to. If you just search for the word Grit or my name on iTunes, you'll find it really easily, and the same with most other podcast platforms. So if you want to go check that out, it is over there to do so. And it is sitting on a lot of top charts right now. I'm so excited, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, like I said in the intro, it is usually a goal of a podcast host to be a new and noteworthy on iTunes. And you can only do that in your first 6 weeks of your podcast being live. And there's different categories of new and noteworthy. There's the broad category, like over all the podcasts and all the categories, here's your new and noteworthy list. Then there's, if you're an art podcast or a business podcast or a relationship podcast or a children's podcast or whatever, here are the sections of new and noteworthy for that. And there's about 10 to 15 podcasts on each new and noteworthy section each day. I will say that back when we launched the first podcast over 3 years ago, there were a lot of podcasts in that new and noteworthy category. And we felt like it was like one of those things like, everybody gets there. This time, I feel like there's less and less every time that you look at it on what's on the new and noteworthy, but also it changes every time. So there may be the same chances of you getting on there as there were 3.5 years ago, but it feels like there's less chances. So I popped on there about a week after the launch of Grit, and I continue to pop in and out of new and noteworthy as new episodes go live and things like that. But also, in addition to that, I have sat in the top 100 business podcasts since launch day. And not even the top 100. Like at some points it's been like the top 70, the top 60. It really just depends on the day. But that makes me so excited. And I know what I did differently, or what I had differently to use to my disposal this time than what happened the first time. So if you're looking to get on new and noteworthy in the first weeks of your podcast launch, this is the video for you. And I just want to give you like 4 or 5 tips on how to actually get on that category of things. All right, so first and foremost, and probably the most important, so I'm going to put it number 1, is to have your fans, your family, and your friends primed and ready to shout it from the rooftops. Now, I have a lot more followers now than I had when we launched the All Up in Your Lady Business podcast over 3 years ago. Like a lot. I didn't have a following when we launched that podcast, to be honest. So it is a no-brainer that I was able to do a little bit more, a little bit quicker with this one because there's an actual following there. But I'm here to tell you that the following, whether you have 100,000 email subscribers or 200,000 YouTube subscribers or 500,000 people who follow you on Instagram, A small but mighty audience can do the same work that a big audience can do. So have your friends, family, and fans primed and ready to share this podcast everywhere they possibly can, to review it, to do all the things that needs to happen for you to be able to give the podcast a boost in iTunes like eyeballs. And what I mean by that is that iTunes doesn't really release like the formula they use to pick people for new and noteworthy. And I will say it's probably one of those things that's like a unicorn. Nobody really knows how to do it. But I do know, based on what I just did, that a lot of it is listens and reviews and subscribes. So if you can have a lot of people ready to do those things for you, you are going to have a way higher chance to get that done. And I'll be honest, like you can totally pull on your friend network. Right before Grit launched, the way iTunes works, you submit it to iTunes and they approve it. And a lot of times it only takes a couple days. Sometimes though it could take up to a week or two. So when you're going to release a new podcast on iTunes, you don't want to wait until a couple days before because it could take longer. So when I was getting ready to launch Grit, it actually was live for about 4 or 5 days on iTunes before it actually went live and I launched it. So what I did in that 4 or 5 days is I used that time to really talk to my very close friends who I knew would be happy to go give the trailer episode a listen and leave me a review. So before I even launched it into the world, I had like 10 or 12 reviews so that iTunes really saw that it was picking up steam really quickly, okay? So have your friends, family, and fans, the 3 Fs, ready to help you promote because it takes a village to raise children and to host and launch a podcast. So there you go. All right, the second thing, remember a minute ago when I just said that reviews have a lot to do with getting yourself on New and Noteworthy or ranking at all in the podcast world. I want you to give an incentive for submitting reviews. I've seen people do this in several different ways. I've seen people who, one time I was at a conference and some people who were speaking at the conference actually got up on stage and told everybody at the conference, there were like 100 or 200 people at the conference, to go review their podcast, and they were going to pick from those reviews to give away like a free basket of goodies. I've also seen it done where maybe the person launching the podcast has a really big audience on social media, and they say something like, oh, if you leave a review, I'm going to pick somebody every week to shout out on my YouTube channel or to shout out on my Instagram. So it can be a non-monetary reward for this as well, but I advise you highly to reward people for leaving a review. So what I did is I said, hey, you guys have a week to leave a review. That first initial burst of reviews, like do it within that first week, because at the end of the first week after I launch, I'm going to pick one person to win an Amazon $100 gift card. So that's an incentive, right? Like the people are like, oh my goodness, yes, let me win this $100 from Amazon because I'm a business owner or whatever and I got things to buy, you know? And the really cool part about that is I gave them a deadline as well. So I wanted it to happen. I wanted to get to a certain number of reviews in that first week. I wanted to get to 100. I didn't quite make it. I think I got like 80, but I wanted to get a lot of reviews in that first week, because what that was going to do to iTunes is tell it that this podcast was really good because it was getting a lot of listens. Remember, number one, everybody giving it the shares and all the things. It was getting subscribes from those listens, and it was getting a lot of reviews. So this podcast was good in iTunes world. And I didn't want to stretch it out over the course of a month or whatever, because I wanted it to happen as quickly as possible. Because the quicker it can get in New and Noteworthy, the quicker it can hit some top charts, the quicker people who weren't already in your audience can find it, and then it just continues to organically grow. So, number 2, incentivize people for leaving a review and put a timeline on it. All right, the third thing is that I want you to give people at least 3 episodes to binge on. Podcasts are like Netflix shows. Once we really find one that we like, we want to listen to them all. And so if you put out one episode and people love it, but then there's not another one for them to binge on, they go into withdrawals and they're going to start messaging you and being like, where is the other episode? I really want it. But 2, you're also not allowing there to be a lot of listen time in that first day or week or whatever. So if you do the math and you have one 45-minute episode, and 500 people go listen to this one 45-minute episode, you have 500 listens on that day, you have 500 times 45 minutes, whatever that is, however long people listen and however iTunes measures success there, versus having 5 or 4 or 3 episodes out there that those 500 people, a percentage of them move on through all the episodes. So now you're drastically increasing your listen time and your downloads, because that is what iTunes sees as successful. So have like 3-ish episodes ready to go live. I had 4. I had a trailer episode and then 3 actual episodes ready to go live for people. And have that ready on launch day so that they can binge all they want to, just like a Netflix show, and then be ready for your show to come on the next week when it's time. All right, number 4. And this one is really important. Number 1 was probably the most important, but this one's really important as well. And that is to never stop talking about it. It is your job for like the rest of eternity to talk about your podcast, but especially for those first few weeks. Really make sure that everything you do, you're talking about the podcast. Every time you get on Instagram stories, you're like, oh, by the way, did you see last week's podcast? When you record your YouTube videos, mention the podcast you just launched, like I just did, guys. Do all the things you know to do to keep the momentum up, because that's going to keep you up in the rankings. What's really funny is I hit, I think, like number 77 or something like that on the top 200 chart of business podcast within the first week. As soon as the weekend hit, though, I dropped completely out of the 200. And then, because I didn't have another episode coming live until Thursday, I stayed out of that 200 until that new episode came up. So if you have this audience that you can throw behind it, constantly talking about it, it won't matter that there's not another episode for a week or 5 days or whatever, because there's people talking about it consistently throughout the process, and you're talking about it consistently. Guys, so I have a hashtag on Instagram that's #StandUpMakeNoise. So if you're on Instagram and you are sharing photos, make sure to go use that hashtag. But my free Facebook group is also called Stand Up Make Noise, and here is why. This is exactly what I'm talking about. If you were standing in the middle of a crowded street, you're at a festival, I don't know, you're like somewhere, and there was an emergency. Let's say the person you were with collapsed and you really needed to get help, and let's just ignore the fact that there are cell phones these days, okay? So you're in this crowded street, the person you're with collapses, and you need to get someone's attention to help you, or maybe a lot of people's attention to help you. What are you gonna do? I'll tell you what you'll do. You're gonna stand up above the crowd, so maybe you're going to get on a table or something, and you're going to scream for help and make a lot of noise. That's exactly what you need to do in your business and in your life with what you want people to know about. People don't inherently know about something you've done because you talked about it one time. You have to stand up, you have to get up above the crowd, and you have to make a lot of noise so people know to look at you. I can't count the amount of times over the last couple weeks that I've had people who are followers of mine who interact with me a lot online and whatever, who will be like, oh, I didn't know you launched a podcast. And I'm like, how did you not know that? I have talked about it for about 100 hours this week. But that's just it. People are in their own worlds. We can't expect that they're constantly following every little thing that we do. So you have to never stop talking about your podcast so that it stays top of mind for the people who didn't see it at first or forgot about it or whatever. You have to stand up and you have to make noise. And you have to make sure that people are hearing you and understanding that you've got something to say and they need to go listen. So those are the 4 ways to get your booty in New and Noteworthy on iTunes. And I'm sure that the other podcast apps have other rankings like this, but iTunes is the one I'm most familiar with, and it's the one that seems to be the most accredited when people are like, oh, I'm in the top 200 on iTunes, or I have 7,000 reviews on iTunes or whatever. So that's why I'm talking about that particular platform. So I want you to do me a favor. I want you to head over to iTunes, and I'd love for you to give the Grit Podcast a lovely listen. There are a lot of episodes there for you to binge on now. And you could even leave a review. I am going to be picking from reviewers every single week and featuring them on the podcast and shouting them out and all the things, because that's what I believe in. So make sure you leave a review, make sure to subscribe, and until next time, bye y'all.